foremost, I'll state that my intended motivation and intent, to the best of my abilities, to be offering this teaching and doing this action of this teaching for the benefit of all others. This is something that I've learned from my teachers for years, and it's good to state it out loud. And those attending should try to do the same, even though you're not teaching. And then also, just sort of housekeeping, those of you who've been here before know that the way I like to do this is I'll do a presentation, and then if you have questions, just put them in the chat if you're comfortable using the Zoom chat. And then when we get the Q&A section, we can orderly, in an orderly way, do the questions and answers. Hopefully you have some. And then anybody who wants to ask the question in person, you could also just put that in the chat, saying you have a question, and then I'll call you, if you will, call upon you in the Zoom. So in previous sessions, this is the fourth session of this course. Previous sessions, especially the first one, I emphatically stated how important it is to have the foundation of what I presented in the first session, and that all the subsequent sessions really roll out or reveal themselves from that overview of what I presented in the beginning, in the first session. So for those of you maybe who haven't been to all the sessions, that's fine, of course. But I do encourage you, if you've missed any, to just, if you get a chance and have some time. One of the nice things about DNKL doing these, sponsoring these teachings, is that they record them and they make them available on their YouTube channel. So for those of you who might want to, look at any of these previous sessions, listen to them, you can do so. And even if you have already attended previous ones and you feel like there's maybe some additional value in listening to them again, then you can go to DNKL's website, and there's a place where you can go and go to like social media, contact us, I think it is. It's in the menu across the top, and you'll see like the YouTube logo there. And if you click on that, it takes you to DNKL's YouTube channel, and you'll see all kinds of great things there. Never mind what I'm teaching, but there's other good things there as well. So so I encourage people who maybe have missed the session to jump on and check it out, because there is a progression to what I'm doing, and each session reinforces what's been taught in the previous session. And I think if you try to make that effort to listen to all the sessions, either live or by going to the YouTube channel, you'll get a lot more out of what the wheel is teaching us. So that's that. In the last session, we covered a quick review of the hub of the wheel. I'll just bring up a visual for a second here. Give me a second. If I could find it. Okay, here we go. So this is a traditional representation of the wheel of life. And it's probably small on your screen, but bear with me. In the very center, we did a quick review of the hub of the wheel, what we call the three poisons, and how from those three poisons, all conceptual manifestations that we experience in our mind are rooted in those three poisons. They're considered the main what are called mental afflictions in our practice in Buddhism, and there are many others that are tributaries, if you will, of these three root afflictions or poisons. And then in the second circle, which you can see is in two halves, dark and light, those are the positive and negative activities, or virtuous and non-virtuous activities, which we covered in detail in our last class. And then what we did was we covered 2 of the 6 realms. That's the next set of circles, which if you could see it, it's kind of hard to see, is segmented into 6 sections. What we call in traditional Buddhism as the God realm, um, the jealous God realm. Some people call it the demigod realm, the human realm, the animal realm, the hungry ghost realm, and the hell realm. So as we talked about in previous classes, I'm trying in this course to relate those realms from a traditional point of view to a contemporary, not so much interpretation, but context of presentation to be relatable to like our moment by moment state of mind, our emotional state. Where are we moment by moment? And becoming aware of that um, within ourselves and the world around us as we're interacting with it, um, based on having some knowledge, which I'm trying to depart here in last week's class, this class, and next week's class, knowledge about what are the characteristics of these 6 realms. We could then start to do some self-examination and work with it. So today, I'm going to stop sharing right now. I'm going to talk about, let's see if I can get rid of this for now. I'm going to start to talk about the human realm. Last week I talked about the God realm and the jealous God realm, and today it's going to be the human realm and the animal realm. And I'm going to move pretty quickly through those. We sort of established a pattern in last week's session where we were able, I think, to just zoom in on what are the main characteristics, qualities, what we call, what David Nichtern in his text calls mindset, and then followed by problems, and then followed by a meditation practice that one could do if we follow David's sort of outline of the realms. And they're very good. So I'm sort of, for these first 2 segments of this class, I'm going to continue that pattern. But then I'm going to get into a discussion about why are we doing this? And it's going to be pointed towards specific types of meditation practices as medicine, if you will, or tools that a master would use to do certain activities and talk about the activities of what we want to do, being informed with what the wheel shows us. And what it shows us is how life works. And so we're trying to, I'm going to try to move us into a discussion about that. And hopefully I'll spend most of the time today talking about that. And it might get a little conceptual. I'll try not to get too conceptual, but might spur some questions. It might be, for some of you, pretty fundamental, but maybe for others of you, like what's he talking about? So I'll try to make it something that we can all relate to. So let's talk about the human realm. This is the third of the 3 realms that are considered upper realms. As we discussed last week, doing virtuous or positive activities tend to, as they karmically ripen and propel us into states of mind that have certain qualities, these tend to be the ones that come from virtuous activities. And then the 3 lower realms, I'll talk about one of them today, which is the animal realm, we tend to be karmically or via cause and effect or cause and result, be propelled into one of those states of mind. And again, we're not necessarily talking about a place. Within the wheel, it could be taught that these are actually states of existence. And in our class, we're talking about them as states of mind, and how to identify them and work with them. So today we'll talk about these 2 realms. And the human realm is characterized by fluctuation between pleasure and pain. It's really what makes us human, and it's sort of accompanied by feeling open and vulnerable. Um, from a practice point of view, in terms of what the wheel has to offer, being born in the human realm is actually very, very auspicious. Um, there's a old fable, and I think Nick Turn also talks about it, mentions it in his book, that tries to capture why being born in the human realm is so precious or auspicious or unique or sort of the once in a lifetime kind of experience. And he talks about an endless ocean. The fable talks about an endless sea. And in that endless sea, there's floating on top of it a little tiny ring, a golden ring floating on top of the ocean. Um, and under the ocean is a giant, sea turtle who is coming up to the surface for the first time in a long time. These giant turtles don't have to come up too often. But it comes up to the surface. And as it comes up to the surface, it puts its neck and its head right through the ring. And the chances of that happening, I don't know what they are. They're incalculable. And the story is meant to say, the punchline is, that being born in the human realm or living within sort of the flow of pleasure and pain in the human realm is as the chances of that happening is just as incalculable as that turtle putting his neck through his or her neck through that ring as it surfaces. So it's a really golden opportunity. And all of us here should really, really try to take advantage of it, and what it has to offer. And especially what the wheel has to offer, it is very, very much to our, the characteristics, plays well to the characteristics of who we are as humans, meaning being able to utilize it. And it all goes to like how we fluctuate between this experience of pleasure and pain. Um, the mindset of being in this sort of mental state is that, we have the characteristic of, if we really stop and think about how our mind is moving, we long for the past. We fluctuate between longing for the past, planning for the future, and worrying about how things will go, aspiring to change ourselves and explore new options. Um, we're always, if we really watch our mind, you'll see that we're always chasing some train of thought. Um, in Buddhism, we call this a frog or monkey mind, one that's randomly kind of going all over the place. There isn't a smooth arc of mental process that's going on. When we really look at our mind, we'll see that, and I'll talk about that a little bit later on. So we vacillate between these states in the human realm. And that's what makes us sensitive to suffering, not only our own suffering, but the suffering of others, which is a key to how we could change our negative states of mind. And we'll get into that a little bit later. But in this space of fluctuation between pleasure and pain, and having that sensitivity to the suffering of ourselves and others, it drives us. It drives us to look for something. Some would say it drives us to look for answers. Answers to what? Answers to like, why are we suffering? Why do we have anxiety? Why do we have depression? Why do we have any of these negative states of mind? And all of us, from our karmic ripening, that again, based on the inner wheel of misapprehension that leads to self-grasping, that's the three poisons at work, activated through non-virtuous activity or virtuous activity, we generate moment by moment our own storylines. It's an internal narrative, a dialogue that kind of pulls us along. And pointed here's the auspicious aspect of being born as a human. If it's pointed in the right direction, it can lead us to go deeper and explore real meaning in our lives. And again, that's what the wheel is indicating is possible. And the potential is clearly there. But we don't necessarily take advantage of that. And I'll talk about that in a second. So I'll give you, like I did last week, I'll give you a few of my own examples. They might seem corny to you, but like, you know, I try to just think of a few things right before the class. So it's something I've recently felt. But the other night, well, let me give you context. I do a lot of contracts for books. I'm a publisher, and I have to really get them done in a timely fashion relative to a lot of logistical movement that goes on, you know, day by day, moment by moment kind of a thing. Well, the other night, out of a sound sleep, I just woke up worried about not getting this specific contract done. And I was projecting forward. I wasn't staying in the moment of sleep. It doesn't just have to be waking. It could be when you're asleep. And my mind went to jump forward towards negative outcomes that could possibly happen if I didn't get this contract. And it was a really important contract. It wasn't just any old contract, which I do a lot of any old contracts too. And I felt myself intensely grasping onto what I would lose as a result of that deal not getting done, the results, the reward, even the revenue that wouldn't come to fruition. After all, you know, it's functioning in the business world moment by moment. And then I was able to stop and let go of that forward grasping, and do a certain quick meditation practice that allowed it to dissolve. And so that's one example. Another example is from this morning. It's a beautiful day here, and it's bright sunshine. And I was taking one of the 3 dogs that live in our house for his morning walk, and we were going up the street. And as I looked at the sky, it was magnificent. Morning, light blue sky with some puffy clouds, just wonderful. And then all of a sudden, my mind went to thinking about a book. This is another publishing example that I just published. I'm gonna grab it real quick, just so I can show you that this is true. This is a book that just came in from the printer in China. It's called Our House by Graham Nash. And the illustrations are just amazing in this book. It's really wonderful. It's a children's book, but everything inside is just absolutely gorgeous. And it goes through the lyrics to the song, "I'll light the fire," you know, blah, 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 blah. And it has all these wonderful pictures. And it's about his living with Joni Mitchell in Laurel Canyon. And Carole King wrote the foreword. So it's a beautiful book, and I'm really proud of it. And it's really important to me. It's the beginning, it's the first book in a new line of children's books I'm doing. And you can't really see it, but the color of the sky is dark. It isn't like a morning light, which is what it's supposed to be. The printer printed the cover too dark. So I'm looking at that morning sky as I'm taking the walk. And my mind went to my upsetness about that cover and how it really bothered me. Well, that's not enough. I projected forward and thought about what I'm doing tomorrow. This is why I'm taking that walk. I'm not in the moment. All of a sudden, I'm over here, you know. I'm projecting forward, like tomorrow I've got to send copies of this book to Graham and to my publishing partner in California. Graham lives in New York, and his manager. And they're going to hate it, and they're going to be really upset. And just everything associated with that. I can go on and on. And that's just a simple example of how you lose yourself in what I described a moment ago, that forward or could be backward, uh, pondering or reflecting and not staying in the present moment. And not just staying in the present moment, but staying in it in a correct way, which we'll talk about later when I start talking a little bit about certain kind of meditation practices. So you could see how easy it is. This thing I talk about, like sort of objectively, academically, like this is a state that's like this. Well, I think any of us could stop and come up with our own examples if we're being mindful of how we slip out of mindfulness of staying in the moment. And it causes us to experience things in a painful way versus a pleasurable way. And not only that, if we remember how we talked about karma being an ingredient of how things work, we're every time we do that, we're planting new seeds of that have the characteristics associated with those thoughts: anxiety, upsetness, fear, even to a certain degree. Oh, what's Graham going to think about this book? It's going to be terrible, and I want to make a good impression on him. I never knew him before, but we're new friends now, and what's he going to think of me? I mean, all these kind of things sort of race through your mind. So these are a couple of examples, and as I said last time, when we talked about the God realm and the jealous God realms, I gave you some examples from myself, and this gets to, and I'm going to talk about it a little bit later, being able to spend time, once we have some context of awareness of what is going on, from the three poisons to the positive to negative activities, to how they project us into one of the realms at any given moment. With that awareness, we can start to do self-examination and work with it. And the human realm is the best possible realm to be in terms of your mental states, versus like some of those ones we talked about, for example, in the jealous God realm, where you're preoccupied with all that stuff we talked about, or being in the God realm when you're just blissed out and you don't really even have an interest in, you don't have the friction of pain that moves you to look for answers, to maybe change the way things are. So really that gets to the problem, right? The problem is we get stuck sort of like in the treadmill of our life, even when we're somebody who's experienced in working with these states like I am. Not that I'm wonderful or anything, but I just gave you a few examples of what happened to me recently. We kind of go around in a habitual sleepiness. It's kind of mixed in with this potential that the human realm has for us uniquely to wake up. That's why I call the course Wake Up Now, really to experience awakening. And we have and I mean this literally, every single moment of our waking existence, we have the opportunity to hold that gently and blissfully and in an incredible way. But those moments of opportunity just go by us. Well, that's being asleep. We're just not experiencing the moment by moment reality in that way. But the good news is we have the potential to wake up. And based on the knowledge that the wheel has to offer, and there's lots of other avenues to go towards what I'm talking about, but this course is about what the wheel has to offer. We then have this opportunity, and the way to do that is through specific meditation practices informed by what the wheel has to teach us. And we're going to spend a lot of time on that as we move forward in the rest of these sessions. Meditation, specific types of meditation practices allow us to really get to know ourselves, to exercise and be more in the moment, and live there, exercise it, get comfortable with it, have that become what's normal, not the being asleep. And that's the wonderful opportunity, the human realm, because that's what we're talking about, has to offer versus any other one of the 6 realms. You might think, well, God, the highest realm's the God realm. That's where I want to be. And no, you want to be here. You're in a unique and fortunate opportunity, being born human and having access to this sort of knowledge and having the free will to pursue certain kinds of practices. So to end the talk about this realm, even though it's the most important one from our point of view, because we're mostly spending time, most of us spend time mental state-wise in the human realm, but as we learned from last week, we spend a lot of time in the other realms too, and that will be, and you'll see that when we talk about the realms we haven't discussed yet as well. And from a, just to, since it's one of the core texts for this teaching, I do want to mention that David Nichtern in his book ends his section talking about the human realm by recommending doing mindfulness meditation. Most of us are familiar with mindfulness meditation. David does a nice, quick, direct, simple, accessible meditation, suggested meditation practice for that. So I encourage you to do that. We're not going to do that today. In wanting to move forward, that's enough to say about the human realm. But it's really quite unique, special. You don't want to throw away the opportunity that is available to you being in the mind set of what the human realm is. So now I'm going to switch over to talking about the animal realm. This applies to all kinds of animals, like just, wild animals as well as domesticated. In the wild specifically, I will say that just one thing, and it's pretty obvious to most of us, that if you're in that realm, remember, I'm not just talking about animals, I'm talking about mental states that have the quality of the animal realm. So someone who's in this state spends, especially if they're in the wild and they don't feel grounded, with a lot of comfort and patterns of routine that they can stay in, if you will. You spend your whole day trying to catch food or not become food. And again, that doesn't just have to apply to animals. Use your imagination. You know that you feel that way often. It might be at work, it might be in a relationship, it might be in some other context where you're being chased somehow, some way, or you're chasing, and you feel like it's essential for your survival, essential for your survival. So the main motivating factor in the animal realm is to avoid pain. You'll know that the common thread in nuanced within all 6 of the realms is the Buddha's first noble truth, that life is suffering. And it's present in each one of the 6 realms in, various ways. So in the animal realm, it's this really sort of primal way of avoiding pain and having pleasure. The main quality here is, from the point of view of which one of the 3 poisons is most operative, is ignorance. This kind of sounds familiar for those of you who were in the last session, right? Because what did we say about the God realm? We said the God realm was a realm that the beings there, or the mental states that we're living in when we're in that realm, we're just preoccupied with pleasure. There's like a complete avoidance of anything else, even if it's going on around us. That's ignorance, right? That's the 3 poisons, or misapprehension, that's at work there, right? So it's the same thing in the animal realm. And in a sense, there's a correlation. The God realm is sort of the highest, I'm using quotation marks for those of you who can't see me, of the 3 upper realms. The animal realm's sort of like the highest of the 3 lower realms. So there's a sort of a correlation there. But another example that I'll use from my own life to illustrate that sort of being preoccupied with pleasure is when my youngest son got married. They had one of those destination weddings, and it was in the Dominican Republic at one of those resorts. And I remember flying in to the airport, and you get on one of these buses, and you drive like through, there's not much around. There's like hardly anything around. But if you're paying attention, you see a lot of poor people, a lot of people living like in shacks and pretty poor conditions. Then all of a sudden you get to these gates, and the gates open up, and you're in this wonderland, this pleasure land. Um, and the whole time you're there, you're being wined and dined, and activities and celebration. It's unbelievably beautiful. Um, but present there, even inside of that location, um, they're all the people who work there. They're all local. And if you tuned into it, you can tell that there was suffering. It's like right there next to all this pleasure. But most people there, I would say all people there, take no recognition of it. So that's another example. Maybe that sort of goes more back to the God realm, not so much the animal realm. But I just thought of it, so I thought I'd share that with you. Um, so, what happens in the animal realm is that animals develop basically repeated patterns of behavior that bring them comfort and avoid uncertainty. Animals don't like uncertainty. It's not a great thing to have. It's sort of like being the pig, in the three poisons, but like with blinders on. David Nichtern calls it that, which I think is great. So you have deeply ingrained patterns of behavior, rigid and predictable. I'm sure we all have some of those. And again, we're not talking about animals. We're talking about literally, we're talking about mental states that have these qualities that we could label this way. So sort of mindless relying on habit to create pleasure and that keeps us from pain. And so, the real ability to break out of these patterns and see over the horizon of possibility, of inquiry, of what if, and exploration, um, inquisitiveness. It's pretty absent. When we're in that mindset, that is not really happening too often. And we can even internalize this when we talk about, sort of clinging to old familiar beliefs, feelings, ideas, even spiritual practices, can become, and I use the word mindless, it's kind of strong, but sort of mindless rituals or activities. Um, so these are sort of the main qualities that permeate the mindset or mental states in the animal realm. And as I already mentioned, the key obstacle is ignorance. In terms of the three poisons, similar to the God realm, there's a lack of dynamic, fluid recognition of the changeable nature of our experience. Again, to put it against the human realm, that fluid movement back and forth constantly between pleasurable experiences and painful experiences. When you're in the human realm or mindset, you can kind of go with that flow, and you can then allow that sort of spurs you on to explore the possibilities. What if? Where are the answers? How can change occur? But when you're retrenched sort of away from that and want to be in your safe, old, familiar patterns, you're more in the mindset of the animal realm, which blocks off, so to speak, the ability to go into that space that the human mental states offer. So, I can give you a few more personal examples of this for myself. Simple day-to-day reality. I'm not coming up with any grandiose things here, but like waking up in the morning and wanting to just stay in bed within that comfort boundary, sort of mindless sleep. Oh, I don't want to wake up. This is just perfect here. So there's no movement of the mind at that time towards inquiry. It's more my movement of my mind is towards retrenching, to wrapping the blanket around myself and staying in there, not wanting to get up and challenge the fluid ebb and flow of painful and pleasurable experiences and the challenges that they present. And I could give you examples from work. When so this kind of goes to sort of collective karmic experience. I work for a company where what's valued is getting a lot of deals done, signing a lot of books, and doing it with the company's template on every level: terms, advances, meaning royalty advances, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I do that really well. It's not a problem with that. But and I feel comfortable in that. It's a quality that I can kind of go with. But if I ever want to do something outside of the patterns, the norms, to break out and move into a fluid space of creative what if, let's do a different kind of a deal. Um, it's really hard. Not so much for me, but for the company I work for. So that's an example of like I live in the moment by moment mindset and flow within the company I work for, where they're very rigid, they're very templated in their what they want to do as a collective group. And it's a major effort to get them to do something different. So that book I just showed you, like this book, is an effort that I made to create a joint venture partnership with somebody who I could bring to the table doing books like that. And I'm doing another book with Don McLean based on American Pie. It's gorgeous. And then I'm doing another one with Brandy Carlisle, and on and on and on. But man, was it a monumental task to get the group to break out of the pattern. Real effort to get out of sort of that animal comfort, rigid mindset. And even at work again, we have these rigid processes of producing books, even all the way through into the design phase, like where books are laid out and designed. They have templates, and it's all for efficiency, like boom, 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 boom. Doesn't allow for any real breathing of unique content packaged and designed, even the way the type flows on the page in any unique way. So whenever I want to do a book that requires that, it is, again, a monumental effort to break through, and I have to use all kinds of skillful means to make it happen. An example of that is I did a book called Sympathy for the Drummer, Why Charlie Watts Matters. And it's a book that if they did it with their template, it would be 6x9. It would be a soft cover book. The type would be really small, lots of words on a page. Well, I had this book set at a very odd size. It's like 5¼ inches by 7½ inches. So it's got sort of a precious feel to it. I've done some books like that, with some editors who used to work with me at one of my imprints Backbeat Books. And not to embarrass her, but she's in this class today. So when you try to do something different, it takes a lot of effort. The book gained all kinds of recognition, and so much so that there was a sunny afternoon one day last year, right after the book came out, and it made its way around and got a lot of great buzz, where the phone rings at my author's house, who wrote the book. And he picks up the phone. And on the other end of the phone, it's Charlie Watts calling him to say how wonderful the book is and what care he took in executing it. And he recognized all those, those sort of breaking the pattern of just putting a book out. He saw the unique qualities that brought that book to life. So that's another example of that I can give you, that if you want to move out of sort of the realms, the mental mindsets and mental states of the animal realm that are fixed and rigid and based on pattern and our comfort zone, it's work. It is work. It isn't necessarily easy. So the main obstacle that exists here in this realm is the absence of curiosity or discernment. Your patterns are so thick and established that you rarely ask questions. You can see how I'm juxtaposing this with the human realm that we just talked about. And, you don't go down that road or look over the horizon of what else is possible. And you sort of get stuck in this fog of habitual behavior, not behavior patterns. And it's hard to get out of because you can't see. You don't have that friction or that fluid back and forth between pleasure and pain, which ironically, truly, listen to this. This is really important. It harkens back to why the human realm is the ideal place to make progress of any kind in this realm of existence, this suffering realm of existence. It's the only realm that that has the experience of discomfort and pain, and that discomfort and pain is what creates opportunity to learn and grow. If you had an absence of that, like in the God realm or like in the animal realm, good luck, buddy. You're stuck. So pleasure, pain, suffering, existence on its face looks like something you want to avoid. In the wheel and in Buddha's teaching in general, you want to embrace it. You want to embrace it in an intelligent and skillful way where you can learn from it and transform that suffering. You don't embrace it because you're a masochist or enjoy pleasure or pain. That's not the end game. But if it wasn't there, you wouldn't have the opportunity to turn towards what is sort of the flip side, the other side of the coin of pain, which is its opposite, if you will. So you get it. You get what the animal realm kind of presents in terms of challenges. On the other hand, I'm bashing the hell out of the animal realm. Sorry about that. The animal realm has some really good qualities to offer us. I'll give myself again as an example. And I'm doing these examples because they're ways that you can routinely, in your own moment by moment flow, look for awareness, self-examination, reflection, and awareness, and identify them relative to the realms. And from there, take them into meditative practices, which we're going to get into in a minute. So one of the good things about the animal realm is it does provide grounding, where you don't swing too far out into the realm of exploration without having some grounding where you can function properly, function in a way that you can do things that require pattern behavior. There are things at work and in your personal life that require that and are good. And so having some of those qualities are really, really important. You got to bring home a paycheck, you got to pay the rent, you got to pay your bills on time. These are all pattern behaviors that you just have to do on a practical level. Nothing magic about it. So these qualities, there's some good qualities to having, these states of minds that are represented in the animal realm. For myself, I daily pine for that grounding. You don't have to believe in astrology, but I'll put this in the context of astrologically, I'm a Libra sun sign, which it has to do with sort of the scales of balancing things. I feel most comfortable when I feel a sense of balance. But at the same time, I have on my ascendant, which is the first house in your astrological chart, which is sort of your outward sense of self and personality and how you operate. My ascendant is Gemini, which is the twins. And worse than that, not that there's anything wrong with being a Gemini, but for me, in an aspect of that house that indicates sort of a shallow shallowness, where I don't go too deep naturally into things. I can touch a lot of things, I can juggle a lot of things, I can move forward on a lot of things, but my natural inclination is not to dive deep. I don't go too much below the surface. My natural tendency. So you can see why my opening comment about like I pine for having the quality of grounding and patterns and focus that mental states that are offered in the animal realm can sort of keep you focused, allowing you to go deeper, to work harder, maybe than the next guy or the next person, to get somewhere. And believe me, I've had to do that in my practice, my own practice, these practices, doing them for a long time, and finally they're starting to stick, So if that's any inspiration. So yeah. And then we get to the practice, as David Nichtern talks about in his book. He amplifies the meditation practice that he offers at the end of his section on the human realm in the animal realm, he offers taking that type of meditation one step deeper into what's called insight meditation. Many of you are probably familiar with that as well. And again, we're not going to do that meditation. I encourage you to look at David's meditation, but it's taking it to that next step of awareness. Once you have mindfulness in the moment, not only having thoughts that arise to you while you're in that mindfulness state of meditation, which happens to all of us, but to become aware of them and to look at those thoughts and to identify them in a certain way and to experience them in a certain way. So it's very valuable. And you can see how that would be a good antidote, right, to the qualities that are the mental states known as the animal realm. I think you can see that if just with that loose definition. But what I want to do now before we do a Q&A is I want to take you into sort of pulling the lens back. We're going to leave the last two realms, by the way, to talk about until our next session, which I think is on March 28th, not next week, but the week after. And that's why I chose to present what I'm going to do now here, because we'll give you a couple of weeks to maybe to play around with what we're going to talk about or think and ponder it. I want to talk about the sort of the pull back and talk about meditation practice as it relates to what we're learning in the wheel, what it has to offer us, teaching us about how life works, and what specific kinds of meditation practices do we have to do to make progress working with, for us individually, how the three poisons are present in our life, in our mind, in our conscious mind flow, how that manifests through virtuous and non-virtuous activities, and then results in having mental states moment by moment, day by day, week by week, in one or more of the six realms. We don't have to be in one realm at one time and then move to another one. We can be in all six at the same time. And that's something we'll talk about later. And before I do that, I promised in the last class that we would talk about, because I didn't do it, last class I gave a reading for those of you who are doing the readings from both David's book and also His Holiness the Dalai Lama's book. And the reading I gave from His Holiness the Dalai Lama's book was a chapter in there on the value of altruism. And you'll see when I get to talking about the type of meditation practices we have to do, why this reading is really important. And it goes to basically the value of altruism. His Holiness the Dalai Lama says that in order to be successful and be happy in transformation of our mental states, we have to get rid of not only mental afflictions, but what he calls the predispositions. And those are what we talked about last time. We spent a lot of time last time talking about karmic ripenings. Those latent planted seeds that then blossom later on, predispositions that come from certain activities centered around what? Centered around the opposite of altruism, which is one of the three poisons, which is self-grasping. So he talks about how there's only one way to really eradicate those sort of predispositions that are of a negative, mental state, mental afflictive nature. And he identifies that as altruism. I called it, you've heard me talk about this in the previous sessions, I call it great compassion. Not just compassion, but great compassion. Great in front of the word compassion to practicing Buddhists really means one thing, which is having compassion for all sentient beings, not just the people we like and excluding people we don't like and people we don't care one way or the other, but all sentient beings. It is important. It is one of the key ingredients to transformation of negative mental states and suffering existence. It is so important that His Holiness in the book, his book on the on the Wheel of Life, dedicates a whole chapter to it, which he is more time than he talks about the realms in his book. He spends more time talking about the 12 links of dependent origination, which we haven't gotten to yet. So that's how important it is. He says that they are, this practice is the most precious thing you can do. And if you're able to develop the practice of what he calls unusual altruism, which means great compassion, you can, even within this cyclic existence of the wheel, what we just showed, you can be in a state of what he calls nirvana, a state of liberation. And what does that mean? That means being free of suffering. And when I think about that and just stay with it for a moment, especially during this time, for some of us who are Christian upbringing and some of us that are practicing Christians during this time of Lent and the approaching Holy Week, when we think about what we think about, like on Holy Thursday, when Jesus is in the garden at Gethsemane and experiencing all the suffering, all the sins of the world, it's no different. It's great compassion. He came here to take on the suffering of all sentient beings. And that's exactly what the Buddha did. And that's exactly what His Holiness the Dalai Lama, that's exactly what the Buddha's teachings call us to do. And the reason is because it is the pathway of activity of mind, speech, and body that allows us to rid ourselves, uproot, destroy self-grasping, which is one of the three poisons. The other one is apprehension, which negates misapprehension, the true nature of all things. And again, just to make the analogy back to Jesus during the time of Lent, that for me is embodied in his death and resurrection. Because if you understand the true nature, not only understand, but can experience the true nature of yourself and all things, you can end death. That's what Jesus did. And so these are what we call the two wings of practice: understanding the true nature of all things, coupled with great compassion, or unusual altruism, as His Holiness calls it. So, this is something that when we then fast forward to talking about meditation practices, that's why in the context of this teaching, where we're understanding and intellectually discussing what the wheel says, what it maps, what it tells us is the blueprint for existence. That's why it's important to do certain kinds of meditation practices, is to be able to then, with that knowledge, operate in a way that allows us to break free of, transform, destroy even those three poisons. And that's why even in the first three sessions, the nature of the kind of meditation practices, albeit we did them very quickly at the end of each one of the sessions, they were all about practices that would end self-grasping. Equanimity, compassion, exchanging self with other. His Holiness in this chapter of the book talks about the two great practices of 7-limb instruction on cause and effect, 7-part instruction on cause and effect, equalizing and exchanging self and other. The handout I gave in advance of last week's class was all about a set of practices that are exactly that. And I can't underscore enough that with it in mind, what it is we've been talking about and trying to understand structurally and process-wise of what the wheel is, giving us a map of how things work, that if we understand His Holiness's underscoring of how important it is to practice great compassion, I'm hoping you can see the direct reason why. It's one reason: it ends self-cherishing, it ends self-grasping, and that's right in that hub, along with misapprehension, or what we call ignorance. And self-grasping is the cause of those other 2, 3 poisons, of attachment and aversion. We sometimes think, well, it's just about attraction, but it also is aversion, because as we self-cherish things that we grasp onto and hold on to ignorantly, meaning misinformed, at the same time, it causes our mind to, at the very same time, take other things indiscriminately, push them away, be adverse to them. So great compassion is, there aren't 3 wings, there's only 2 wings. There's wisdom, in other words, apprehending how things really are, and then there's the practice of great compassion. So if you want to sort of exercise and put your mind stream moment by moment, your mental state flow into an ideal place to do the kind of meditation practices that the wheel requires, which we're going to talk about in a few minutes, you have to understand the value of these specific types of meditation practices. And there are so many. I'm just doing this I'm holding up a lot of books today. I don't know why. But this volume here, you can see how thick it is. It's over 700 pages. They're mind training meditation practices offered to Buddhist practitioners or anyone. It's fascinating. There's all kinds of practices in here. It's an incredible toolbox. It's like a plethora of medical expertise to work with your mind and transform your mind. But the ones that His Holiness calls out, and I'm going to talk about a few that are in that collection, so it has some purpose in me holding it up, are the ones that are squarely focused on the kinds of things we need to practice connected to the wheel. But His Holiness warns us, and that's why I put it in this book about the wheel of life. He didn't put it someplace else. You have to practice great compassion. You have to practice that unusual altruism. And he gives these 2 meditation practices. We don't have to do them. Again, we don't have time for it, but they are in that set of meditation practices I circulated. And that's why I circulated those, because that's how important they are. And I circulated them early on in these sessions, because they're like working out at the gym, where you get ready to be able to do something that requires more if I put it into the context of maybe being a runner. If you're going to prepare to run a marathon, you first have to get your body in shape, eat properly, do certain things with muscle tone, etc., and then start running short distances and then longer distances, and hydrate and do all these techniques around it. Well, really, meditation practice is no different. You've got to work at it. It isn't like anything magic, it's work. So His Holiness gives us 2 meditation practices in here. And then he goes further and he talks about the practice of what's called the 6 perfections. In Buddhism, there's a great Buddhist saint named Master Shantideva, who wrote a seminal text, which is famous even to a lot of Westerners, called A Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life. And in there, he disseminates the 6 perfections. These are 6 active practices that someone can do that generate the heart of great compassion. It's like what we did in that Tonglen practice, meditation practice last week, when I talked about visualizing your heart center radiating light. It literally, where does that light come from? What fuels it? What actually creates that state of heart, which is a metaphor for how you feel. it's these types of practices. If you don't do these kind of practices, it's just going to be like sort of a vague visualization in your mind that your heart's radiating when you're taking in the pain of others and then dissolving it. It's very auspicious to be able to create that kind of light. That's quality, is that of great compassion. And so he gives us 6 additional practices to do. And I won't go into them in detail, but if you haven't read this part of His Holiness's book, and maybe even if you care to, if you haven't read A Bodhisattva's Guide to the Way of Life, you might want to check that out. It's a little more tricky. It's in verse form. It's very poetic. Sometimes it's very like, whoa, in terms of what he's saying, and you have to really work with it. But essentially, the first perfection, I'm only going to cover the first 4 real quick. The first one is giving, which really means to train from the depths. I'm reading from the book here from His Holiness, from the depths of the heart in an attitude of generosity, such that one seeks no reward or result for oneself. The act of charity and all of its beneficial results are dedicated to all other sentient beings. Again, that's great. That's what gives it the quality. If you're doing giving with that mindset, that's what gives it the quality of great compassion, if you will, versus sort of ordinary compassion, which is powerful and wonderful enough. And then the second perfection is ethical practice. This is a root practice of a person who is trying to do that practice of doing everything they do for the benefit of all sentient beings. And in Buddhism, we call that a bodhisattva. And that's to be restrained in it. And when we talk about being restrained, it's in a very specific way. We restrain ourselves from being self-centered. Again, it's an antidote to self-grasping. Duh, it's not that complex. So when you're practicing self-restraint, if your mind can have that awareness and feel the openness and spaciousness of moving away from self-grasping, it's liberating. Some people think practicing moral code or behavior or ethics is like very restrictive, even using the word restrain. If you really can experience it, it is incredibly liberating. It's just as giving is. But it takes a little bit more of that focus of remembering who you're doing it for. And then the third perfection is cultivating patience, the perfection of patience. And in this kind of practice that we do connected to the wheel, meditation practices, it's incredibly important to have patience because it takes a lot of work. And I can't underscore enough how important it is to do the compassion meditation practices, again, that I've already circulated. They're really very, very important. And then the fourth perfection is what's called the perfection of effort, joyful effort. And this is something that one wants to do where in your actions of body, speech, and mind, you gladly, and again, you have to really do a lot of practice around developing great compassion. You gladly take on not only your own suffering, but the suffering of all others. And that's really hard. And why would you do that? So again, the key to that is understanding, if you just remember one thing, is that it is the antidote to self-grasping, which causes all of our suffering. And again, the wheel teaches us that, and you can go back and reflect on that and spend time with it. And, His Holiness calls this fourth of the sixth perfection, joyful effort, is that you do it joyfully. You don't just make the effort, but the quality is joyful. And he calls it putting on armor. And so it's like you're going into battle, because that, armor it's like a war. it isn't something that just sort of happens. Again, it goes to the theme of doing the work. And then I really, in connection with great compassion meditation practices, I highly recommend, we're not doing them in this class, but I want to just say it, I highly recommend checking out the mind training practice of what's called the 8 verses of mind training. Just Google it and go to Amazon. You'll find a volume on it. There's many teachings offered on it. It's in this big book of mind training, the Great Collection, which are all Mahayana Buddhist practices that are in that particular volume. And the rest of His Holiness's chapter on the value of altruism is a wonderful section. Every one of the chapters in this book ends with a Q&A. This particular Q&A section is really wonderful. And I highly encourage you to look at it. So, of course, I don't do it justice. I'm only sort of trying to spur you on to maybe go look at that reading and do the meditation practices that are foundational so you can run the marathon of the type of meditation we want to get into. So I want to take a little bit of time here now just to sort of talk about meditation practice, whether it's the specific meditation practices like David Nichtern recommends, or more in general, pulling back from that. Some of the meditation practices many of you might know. Some people do mindfulness, what's called mindfulness meditation. Other people do insight meditation, which is I would say a more advanced version of mindfulness meditation because it's pointed at something specific. In Buddhism, we call that kind of meditation practice where something's pointed at something. That's analytical meditation. You're pointed at an object of meditation, and that object doesn't have to be a thing. It could be. You could be meditating on an image of the Buddha, or you could be meditating on a concept, or a mental state, or a mental affliction. So what I'm going to talk about now is pointed in that direction. There's a 2-stage process of this type of meditation practice where your focus is pointed on a specific object. And then once you have that object well in hand in meditation, you rest in it in a very specific way. So for our purposes today, I'm going to talk about meditation within that context. And some of this might be elementary for some of you, but I think it's healthy to talk about and to review things that maybe all of us already even know. Again, like I said last time, you might all be enlightened beings and you're only humoring me so I can make some progress on the road by being here today. And thank you for that, by the way. I mean, being here, whether you're enlightened or not. So what is meditation? I think we could say in this context, it's calm, focused awareness of the mind, your mind, moving on your breath with knowledge of the true nature of things, meaning yourself and all phenomena. But it's resting in an open, spacious, moment by moment awareness. So that's a mouthful because I went right from focused on an object to calm abiding, which is sort of that second part of meditation. Remember, there's 2 parts here. So let's talk about the participants. Who's participating in this kind of meditation practice? We have 2 aspects of ourselves that are at work here. The mind, our consciousness, and we could think of our mind as the rider, meaning think of like an equestrian horse rider who's really skilled riding a horse. And the writer isn't just writing, the writer is doing it skillfully with calm, focused awareness, as I described before, with the knowledge of the true nature of things. The other participant here is your breath. We might maybe, to get it disconnected from our course level breath, we might want to label it as our wind. In our anatomy, we have the course level of wind, which is our breath that we can recognize at any given moment we take time out to do so, like when we do meditation practice. But there are deeper levels of the movement of our wind. But for this purpose, think of your breath or your wind as being the horse. That's what's traveling. That is what's moving. But it isn't doing so unless it has someone who's commanding it, so to speak. And that's your mind. So you can think of like the rider being like your mind, the horse being like your wind or your breath. And you're moving that in a very specific way in meditation. There's also a third aspect of meditation in terms of participants, and we're not going to talk about it much. It'd be fun to do it in another class, but that's the observer, the watcher, the witness. Who's actually witnessing this? If our mind is and our breath are the active participants, somebody's got to be seeing this. It's not me. I mean, if you're doing this, any one of you. But that's for another day. So in this type of meditation practice, though, the goal is to bring this clear, focused awareness to the forefront of our experience. And not only on the meditation cushion. When I say the goal, it's also projecting forward. But when we're not on the cushion, the goal is to have this clear, focused awareness always, all the time, every single moment. That should be our goal. Goes back to what His Holiness said in that reading, that if one can be in that state, even though you're still in cyclic existence or within the wheel, you are in a state of nirvana. That's what he says. So the question then becomes, how do we control, or maybe more accurately, say, develop the ability to always, all the time, be in a state where our mind's naturally present in this way, with clarity, focus, awareness. Of what? Of the nature of myself and all phenomena as appearing to me, what's dependently arising. So that's what we're going to explore. Again, sort of assuming we've moved beyond doing the preparatory, and you never want to stop doing them, but the preparatory sort of compassion exercise, meditative exercises to develop that firm platform to stand on. We're now exploring more how we work with that foundation in the context of bringing forth that other aspect of our experience, which is our actual mental states, our mental afflictions, and what are their true natures. We're actually going to be bringing them into meditation. And you might go, why would I want to do that? That's working with your suffering. And there are specific meditation practices that are there to help you work with those. Because after all, remember, what did we say at the beginning of this class? Let's understand what the wheel has to offer. Let's understand how that results in our moment by moment mental states, and how can we work with them if we want to work with them, if we want to become aware of them and work with them, meaning what? Transform them, change them, adjust them, be happier, be in less of a state of suffering, maybe even see that suffering is not what it appears to be, but rather could even be seen as a blessing, that because it's there. Remember how I described what the human realm is? It affords, that literally is what affords us the opportunity to make progress or to do transformation. So, we need to start with an understanding of why it's important to develop this. And I've been babbling on about that, so I probably don't need to say too much more with that, but it's basically, how the hell do you work with the rider and the horse to get to a place where we can be focus specifically on our mental afflictions and be able to work with them. And that's the reason why I gave you, even somewhere, sort of personal, not a big deal personal, somewhere about work, somewhere about, mundane moment by moment things, but I gave you all those examples of my own. That's having the ability to self-examine, and you can do it on and off the cushion. You're going to find the most success in finding the ability to examine yourself and turning towards yourself on the cushion, because that's when you're quieter. But this goes beyond that idea of just relaxing, going into a meditative state and relaxing in the moment and feeling the open spaciousness. We're going to put in front of that doing analytical meditation on the object. And the object in this type of meditation is actually your mental afflictions. So the reason you do this process, hopefully I've made it clear enough, but essentially you're looking to gain that moment by moment experience where you have clarity, focus, and awareness of the true nature of yourself and all phenomena. And of yourself means all your moment by moment mental states. And by doing that, you're able, with gentleness and first and foremost self-compassion for yourself and all others, be moved to transform those mental states into those negative mental states into positive mental states, and maybe even beyond, which I'll talk about in a minute. So again, stay with me if you can, but it's essentially this state of having this awareness of the true nature of yourself and all things is the direct antidote to that ignorance, symbolized by the pig. Finding correct apprehension. And correct apprehension, by the way, is goes all the way back to when we get into that second circle, meaning the one that's right outside of the center hub of the three poisons, where we have the positive and negative, or virtuous and non-virtuous activities. Remember, what's the 10th, the last of the virtuous activities? Correct view. That's what we're talking about here. If you're able to develop correct view, meaning see your mental arisings, your thoughts as they arise, your mental states as you're able to turn to them in meditation and identify them as being of this quality, in this realm, derived from this non-virtuous type of activity or virtuous activity, anchored in the root of ignorance and or self-grasping, you could start to work with fluidly with that thought, not just do insight meditation where you look at it, recognize that it doesn't have a quality that you should hold on to, which does point towards this true nature of things. So it does have real value to do insight meditation, but it sort of takes it a step further, because you, as a skillful rider of the horse, are working with that object. You've ridden your horse up to that particular mental affliction, that mental state, and you analyze it and then bring it into that resting open space once you see its true nature. That's essentially what's happening here. And why are you doing that? It's all motivated by great compassion. If it's only motivated for yourself, that's not bad. But from a karmic ripening point of view, a cause and effect point of view, that's not going to get you beyond suffering existence. It might get you, from a mental state point of view of where you end up, it might bliss you out in like an elevated state of meditation. Or if you put it in the context of a traditional Buddhist experience, give you rebirth in a God realm. But we already talked about how that's not a place where you want to be. It's suffering. It's the ignorance of not knowing where things come from. And there's a lot of practitioners who do deep meditation practices where they can really go to a place where they can take on these objects of meditation of self and phenomena and see them directly, and they literally stop the movement of their mind, because that's what's required in order to see something truly directly and not just sort of taste it. So that literally means, from a physiological point of view, just to digress for a moment, someone who's in that state, they actually don't, they stop breathing. I'm sure all of you have heard stories of yogis who reach that meditative state. They might go beyond that, because how would I know? But that's an outward sign. One of the first books I read when I was a young person was Autobiography of a Yogi, Paramahensha Yogananda, and he, in great detail, talks about these types of states that he was able to reach. So you can do that for yourself, and it will get you to a more pleasurable state. But remember, when we talked about the God realm, we talked about how it could be even addictive spiritually, because you'd be a really advanced practitioner and eliminate for really, really, really long periods of time any pain. That's what being in the God realm is. And in the physical, cyclic existence state of being, being able to go into that sort of yogic state where you literally stop the movement of your mind is sort of a good example of that. But it can happen in many, many, many ways. So in this teaching that the Buddha offers us, the underscoring the need to take flight with both wings of seeing the true nature of things, but it has to be your action of body, speech, and mind have to be motivated by great compassion. They're the two wings that will give you flight. If you only have one, you're going to get stuck in, you might have some really nice long stretch of pleasurable mental states, but it isn't going to last. So I have to keep underscoring that. That's really, really important. So my notes here basically, go through all that what we have to keep in mind in doing this type of meditation is everything we've covered so far. What are the root causes of all suffering, the three poisons? What is the true antidotal value of actively developing in meditation practice actions of body, speech, and mind that are rooted in virtuous qualities versus non-virtuous ones? And seeing how doing one or the other amplifies or reinforces the three poisons or their opposite. And then the third is remembering how important it is to understand how karma works. Related to these virtuous or non-virtuous activities, they can be the cause of good, bad, and mixed karmic results, or cause and effect results. So this is what actually creates our moment by moment mental states. So having sort of the knowledge of that in the front of your mind should motivate you to do these practices, and also to be doing them with an understanding of why you're doing them. In this type of meditation, that's part of the analytical process, is having that sort of be the foundation that you stand on, even when you're in meditation, not just when you're off the cushion. So I've explained, how these things have to be present to you. That's why we've been studying the wheel. It sort of culminates in giving us the knowledge we need to do certain types of meditation practices, to work with what the wheel tells us is the structure and map of life and how we can change it. So the next value that you have to have in order to be able to do this type of practice is, and I brought it up a few times over the last few sessions, is having the ability to do self-examination. And for some of us, that's not easy. We might be more prone, for example, to be in mental states that are in the animal realm, or in the jealous God realm, or in the God realm. God realm, animal realm, we're avoiding pain. We're also avoiding looking at ways that we could work with our state And then in the jealous God realm, remember how animated I was last week and talking about all the qualities. We're so damn preoccupied with getting ahead and competing and on and being like paranoid and concerned. And, it's just, what a, upset place to be, creating anxiety and depression and all kinds of mental afflictions. And then there's, the human realm, which ideally, again, allowing yourself to be able to not only experience pain, but actually be aware of it and to identify it in the form of what is your mental state when you're doing that? What is the mental affliction that's ripening at that moment? And so this quality of having the ability to self-examine, not for just any reason, but specifically so that we can work with the realm's state of minds as it relates back through how they come about, through the three poisons, through the virtuous and non-virtuous activities. So it's another reason I'm going to do one more cell job on why it's important to have great compassion, because you'll see in all those compassion and equanimity practices that it's just as important to be compassionate towards yourself as it is all others. Without being compassionate towards yourself, you could, in doing this kind of work, end up getting down on yourself, beating yourself up, thinking less of yourself, going, oh my God, I'm a mess. Or whatever. If you have propensity for certain mental states, that are unique to you, like maybe you tend to get depressed or get anxious or get jealous or get envious or get whatever, you can identify them. Those types of emotions might arise to you when you're doing self-examination, but that's where you apply the gentle understanding that what the wheel has to offer, that we all live in a moment by moment misunderstanding of how things really work. And we're trying to solve that for ourselves and work with it. And it's okay that I'm like this because everybody else is in the same boat. We're all in the same boat. But it's sort of like, more than sort of like, it is not dissimilar to making a conscious effort to, like you do if you go, like, not that any of you've done this, but like if you go to for psychoanalysis or go to a psychiatrist or go to a therapist, a psychologist for therapy, it requires that you do self-examination. And sometimes it's really hard, but we call that turning towards the object that you have to look at if you want to make progress. In psychotherapy, they call that insight, when you're able to see it. And then the real work begins. So it's no different here. We're not creating an alternative to like how your mind works. Your mind, psychotherapy follows the same course of process that this type of meditation practice does. It just does it based on certain knowledge and awareness of where things really come from, and work with that. And so one of the things that Master Shantideva recommends is that you be very gentle with yourself when you start doing this self-examination, where you take your mental afflictions into your meditation process. And if you can't put on that armor, joyful effort, like, yeah, I'm all down with my mental afflictions, I'm going to bring them with me. And it's hard. Go at your own pace, back off, talk to a friend. One of the things in Dharma practice, which is technically that's what this is that, hopefully you could feel safe to talk to other people who are maybe doing the same practice, and it's highly encouraged. And also David Nichtern underscores in his book how important it is when you start to do these kind of practices, that the value of having a teacher, somebody who knows, who's been on this road and knows some of the pitfalls, and maybe if they don't know all of them, they have a network that they can tap. So again, it's no different than going to a psychotherapist. It's not like you're on your own. You should feel a sense of community. Hopefully you have a friend or two that maybe is doing similar practices, and you can, with trust and comfort, engage with them. Better yet, maybe have a teacher or a mentor or somebody else you feel you can talk to about these kinds of things, because I will guarantee you, if you try to do the work, which you have to do, you will come upon obstacles, and you'll have moments where you get stuck. And a lot of that will have to do with the fluid back and forth between pleasure and painful states of mental states. And sometimes it's a matter of waiting it out. So, it's really work. That's what I'm underscoring, and look for support. And also don't look past the Dharma itself as being supportive. Like do a Tonglen meditation practice as a potential aid. As an example, you can do that if you're feeling overwhelmed. Take your own sufferings as you've identified them as potential objects of meditation and dissolve them in that Tonglen meditation practice, and bring yourself the qualities that you normally are bringing to someone else when you're exhaling, doing the Tonglen meditation. You can actually put yourself out here in front of you as an object of meditation, and bring all this wonderful qualities of goodness and happiness and peace, whatever qualities you want to attach to that light going out from you. You can bring it to yourself. Just duplicate yourself out in front of you. So, there's lots more that you can do in that regard, but essentially, what I'm trying to identify for you is the object of meditation in this type of practice is actually your mental afflictions. And for some of us, that might be tricky. But I couldn't even bring that up in any way, shape, or form until we sort of got farther into the exploration of first the inner circle of the three poisons, the positive and negative activities, and substantially into the realms of existence that we've been discussing. And so far, we've discussed 4 of them. So, from here, I'd just like to take, there's probably a lot to, as I'm listening to myself, it's probably a lot to get into. And probably what I'll do, and I think I'll do this. I think what I'll do is stop here, because there's a lot more to talk about in terms of this type of meditation practice, and it gets into the nature of the objects of meditation, including the gaps. Even David Nichtern calls them the gaps in between the thoughts that arise to you in meditation. It's a mouthful, it's a handful to talk about that. So I think I'll put that sort of as part 2 of this discussion about this type of meditation practice. Reserve it till next session on the 28th. And what I'll do in that session is I'll cover, like I did here, I'll cover the last 2 realms, what they call in Buddhist practice traditionally in the wheel, the hungry ghost realm and the hell realms. And then I'll cover this second part of this particular type of meditation practice in a little bit more close detail, which could make you feel a little bit overwhelmed, especially since I've been talking for so long and talking about trying to keep the concepts grounded. But it's the best I can do. So what I'll do here is take some questions, and then what we're going to do following that is I'm going to read some auspicious verses from the mind training book that I showed you that underscore the value of bringing your mental afflictions into meditation. So this isn't coming from me. These are traditional practices. It's not something I made up, So let's see. Let's see if we have any questions. Let's see. Are there any questions here? I think Bernadette made some comments. One of them is like what he says is true. We were talking about Bernadette's the editor who we worked with together previously, and when I was talking about some of those special books that we did. They're great books too, Bernadette. And Bernadette says a few other things, but I don't know if there's any questions there. Or Rachel, Bernadette, do you have any, before I go to Rachel, Bernadette, did you actually have any questions you wanted to ask? Okay, she said no. So Rachel, you said you have a question?
Yeah. Maybe simple, I may be missing something, but regarding the practice, I guess you say, of joyful effort. When you say you take on the suffering of others, is that a mental process? Is that you're taking it on in your thoughts, your mental thinking? Is it an emotional burden that you take on? Is it a prayer for others? Is it aspirations for others? Is it what is that? How do you actually take on the sufferings of others?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. There are tangible ways to do that, both in meditation practice and in aspirational practice and action. In terms of meditation practice, some of the meditation practices that I disseminated before last class have that, the 7-part cause and effect practice, where you go through the 7 steps that make up that practice, and it ends. The 7th step in that practice is joyful effort. It's this embracing of based on the steps that came before, rather than walking through all the steps. I advise you to go look at that, and you'll see that that's an example of a meditation practice where you take on joyfully, especially joyfully, because that's what we're talking about here in the context of your question, that kind of burden, which isn't a burden. But that's what that meditation develops in your mind stream, and experientially allows you, if you will, to get off the cushion and feel and experience taking on that burden of others' suffering with that same open, spacious, not burdened experiential sense in your own moment by moment moving along. And so I highly recommend those kind of meditation practices on the cushion. Another one is Tonglen, like we did last week. That is a practice you can do directly with just one person, or sentient being. It could be your dog, it could be whoever. But it's highly advised in that practice, and and even in the 7-part cause and effect practice, or exchanging self and other practice, which are in His Holiness's. Those are the 2 he talks about in that chapter on altruism. If you read even right on the first page of that chapter, he talks about the importance of expanding it to all others. So doing those specific meditation practices will change. They will change if you do them well. They will change your experience of suffering from something that feels burdensome and closed in to being open and spacious. And I underline that word experiential. When you keep it in the sort of intellectual realm of like, teaching and learning and contemplating, it doesn't really happen. The experience of that happens in meditation practice. But other things you can do to create that experience is to mindfully do the 6 perfection practices. Again, I went over them quickly, but again, it's another reason I brought up His Holiness's chapter on that in the book. He talks about making sure that you do those practices for the benefit of all sentient beings, and then actually doing them, doing your own moral and ethical practice within yourself, and then dedicating that to everyone, the ending of all people's suffering existence is a very powerful thing. Or when you're giving to someone, don't have it just be for them. Even though it's not for you, you're giving to someone, always expand it to like all sentient beings. And doing that with your mind, it changes the way you start to experience the suffering that caused you in the first place to give something to that person, whether it's, money or food or a hug or whatever. It opens up, everything opens up. And that openness is an experiential movement away from experiencing restriction and suffering. And so I would apply that to those first 4 of the 6 perfections. And doing the work, if you actually try doing those practices both on the cushion and off the cushion with that sort of mindfulness, I think you'll feel, I'm sure you'll feel that open up. And it isn't a burden. It's more of an awareness of the true nature of suffering, and how by doing these activities, you're creating the conditions first within yourself, and then in the future for others who you are sharing that with, ideally all sentient beings, but it could also be 1 or 2 people. You're creating the conditions for that not to continue. And that goes back to reflect back on the wheels and how it informs you in terms of the root poisons, how karma goes into action, if you will, through the positive and negative activities. And you'll start to see that very clearly. So a lot of it has to do with what's in your mind when you're doing these things. Hopefully that helps. Okay, let's see. Denise says, can you give us what we should read in each book for the next class? Yes. So for the next class, it's pretty simple. I would read the last 2 chapters in David Nichtern's book on the realms, what does he call them? The hungry ghost realm, which is chapter 7 in that book, and the hell realm, which is chapter 8 in that book. And it's not a required text. It's one of the supplemental texts, but if you have it, Mind Training, the Great Collection, part of the Library of Tibetan Classics, you would read and meditate on chapter 12 and chapter 13, which I'm actually going to cover in this session, but you need to bring it on the cushion with you, what those chapters talk about. It's an expensive book, so it might not be within everybody's, means to buy a copy, but I highly recommend the volume. It's a treasure trove of specific meditative prescriptions for working with this kind of practice, mind training practice. So not that much more new to read in the core text. After that, we'll get into, I'll probably have to circulate some handouts where we talk more in depth about the 12 links of dependent origination. David Nichtern's book doesn't really talk about them much. Just one little section, and His Holiness does talk about them to some degree. So that's where we're going to go to after we finish talking about the last 2 realms. So let's see if there's any other questions. Okay, so I think that's it. No other questions. Everybody's bewildered or is completely enlightened, one or the other. That's it. Okay. So what I want to do is finish this session, not with a meditation. Not that it's not like you haven't heard me enough today, but I do want to underscore what we've been talking about with some real authoritative readings. They're short, so it won't take too long, that underscore the type of meditation practice that I'm encouraging us to participate in. And they are in that book, the mind training, the great collection that I just mentioned. And the first one is, sorry, I was just getting caught up on my printout of my own. The first one is just a short essay on taking afflictions, what's called onto the path. So it's called The Teaching on Taking Afflictions Onto the Path, and that's chapter 13 in this book. And this is a essay that has a meditation in it. That is comes from an authoritative source, a great Buddhist teacher, Cerullo. So I'll just read this, if that's okay. It is said that the instruction for transforming forceful mental states, such as attachment and aversion, into the path on the basis of the two awakening minds, I'll editorialize and say those are those two wings of wisdom and compassion, is presented in Tantra. Now, editorialize again, Tantra are certain sort of advanced Buddhist practices that maybe not a lot of people do. And certainly that's not what we're doing here. What we're doing here is more in the line of what's called sutra, or open teachings. So Cerullo says it is possible for ordinary afflictions themselves to become aspects of the path. So that's what we've been talking about and learning in this class. As for taking afflictions onto the path by means of selecting them as your meditation focus and turning them away is concerned, this has been taught repeatedly in sutra. So that's my responsibility to underscore for you that this is very mainstream practice, not something that's John Cerullo made up. So with that said, the instruction is as follows. Take attachment, for instance. First, when you observe yourself experiencing attachment to either an internal experience or a specific external object, contemplate the following. This is the affliction of attachment. If not relinquished, not purified, and not conquered, it will give rise to immeasurable suffering, such as birth in the lower realms. Of course, we could think of that as mental states that are not advantageous to our living a healthy life. It will give rise to immeasurable suffering in the lower. If transformed and conquered, it can become a condition for full enlightenment. We could also say that it becomes a condition for future healthy, positive mental states of mind, even in the realm of suffering existence or cyclic existence, like His Holiness the Dalai Lama said. I will therefore conquer it so it becomes a condition for Buddhahood. And of course, it could be, as I just stated a moment ago, your goal doesn't have to be Buddhahood. Thinking thus, take into your mind your enemy's afflictions of attachment. Rachel, this goes to talking about what, this practice as well is not just bringing your own, when you have an awareness of your own mental affliction, such as the affliction of attachment, you then also bring all others. You're doing it in an imaginary way, but this is creating future conditions for this condition to not be present in your own mind stream and others. So it's sort of important, even great compassion has its presence here when you're doing this kind of meditation. Remember the two wings of practice. So then, as you do when meditating on loving kindness, Cultivate this towards a larger sphere, meaning all sentient beings. Finally, take upon yourself all the attachments, including their propensities, existing in all beings. As you do this, imagine that your own attachment becomes so great as to be unfathomable. Imagine that all sentient beings become free, including yourself, of attachment and attain enlightenment. This is the practice of taking afflictions upon yourself on the basis of conventional awakening mind. Take upon yourself this attachment of yours, now the size of what he calls Mount Muru, which is this huge mountain, and heaps of others' attachment as well. Then reflect as follows. Attachment is by nature mental. Apart from the mind, there is no attachment, not even an atom's breath. So when the mind observes itself, past and future states become no more. He's talking about staying in the moment. The past has ceased to be, while the future is yet to be. And the present, get this, is devoid of any identifiable characteristics, such as shape, color, and so on. That's looking at its true nature. You're not self-grasping onto it with labeling it as such and such and such and such, and it has this fixed quality, and it's always like this, and it's good, it's bad, it's love, it's wonderful. It devoid of all identifiable, it's the absence of that object having, of attachment having its own inherent existence. So not existing in any manner, the mind, your mind, abides like space. So what is called attachment is a mere name. It's a mere name with no reference at all. Place your mind in this state as long as it abides. This is the practice of the ultimate awakening mind. So what he's presented here is two ways to look at a mental affliction. One is with compassion. That's when you're bringing all sentient beings' attachments into your meditative focus. And then, almost like you do in Tonglen, instantly dissolve them for yourself and others. They no longer exist. They've been washed away. You know, that's the prayer. That's the focus. And then there's this one that is called ultimate awakening mind. What makes it ultimate is bringing the same similar analysis onto the cushion of seeing your attachment. And it doesn't just have to be attachment. It could be a specific mental state that you've identified for yourself, that you gently identify for yourself. And you do this analysis of it having no past, no future, only in the present moment, but in the present moment, it has no identifiable characteristics. It's only there by your mere naming of it. And it has no inherent self-existence. That's seeing its true nature. That's what makes it ultimate. That's the wisdom wing. So the first way of looking at it is with great compassion. The second way is with wisdom. First one is an antidote to self-grasping. Second one's an antidote to misapprehension. So he goes on to talk about like from what arises from these two meditative practices. It's really succinct and wonderful. So the last one I'll read to you is more a set of verses. You really have to study them and ponder them. But as you listen to them, try to remember what we just heard in Sir Lingpa's little essay about ultimate awakening, where what the words I'm saying and what I'm saying are experienced with yourself, the object that you're partaking in, which is hearing me read this, and the person reading it have that same nature in this moment of nothing more than name labeling, no referential, point. because everything has that nature at every moment. So this is called leveling out all conceptions, also by Cerullo. He says, herein is contained a teaching conferred by Cerullo on Atisha. Atisha was a great Buddhist teacher, to help him subdue the barbarian borderlands. He's talking about his mental afflictions. So it's a great way to refer to it. I love the war. Maybe it's because I'm a male. I don't know. So here's the verse. Level out all false conceptions. Carry forth the force of all antidotes. Concentrate all aspirations into one, and seek the path where all paths converge. These are the four enlightened factors, the antidotes. They are vital if you are to tame the barbarian borderlands. Adverse conditions are your spiritual teacher. That's what we've been talking about, suffering. They're your spiritual teacher. Demons and possessor spirits, get this, are the Buddha's emanation. Wow. Sickness is a broom for negative karma and defilements. Sufferings are displays of ultimate reality's expanse. So think about, I'm editorializing, think about what that's saying. It talks about the opportunity that on its face value, suffering existence that we want to run away from is something we actually want to turn towards and explore. Because within understanding what suffering really is, we turn the key to seeing the true nature of all things. And we're spurred then to share that with all others, which is what great compassion is. So this is really a powerful, powerful verse. These are the four thoroughly afflicted factors. So on their face value, they're afflicted. But the flip side of them, the other side of the coin, is that they are the greatest blessing that could come into your life if you see them correctly. They are vital if you are to tame the barbarian borderlands. I have a hard time with that word. This training is the great counterpoint to happiness. This is the great successor to misery. This is the charm that attracts misfortune. This is a capping of wishes that are least useful. These are the four antidotes to misguided ways. They are vital if you are to tame the barbarian borderlands. Self is the root of negative karma. It is to be discarded. That doesn't mean we throw ourselves away. It really means our mistaken perception of self. So, other is a source of enlightenment. If it is to be embraced enthusiastically, joyful effort. Other is all others. These are the two wings. Understanding the true nature of self is wisdom. Understanding, embracing all others is great compassion. So he's just making a statement about those two wings we were discussing in the teaching. Cast away decisively, let go with ease, dismantle thoroughly, and let be with gentleness. So he's talking about when you bring mental afflictions into your meditative process, having that sort of insight meditative process, which I'll talk more about next week, of seeing it, its true nature, sort of what Cerullo said in talking about how to look at that object in the present moment, letting go of its past and future, and just letting it go and being with it in ease. And that dismantles all of the reality that of suffering that are created by our misapprehension. So this set of verses, which I stopped and editorialized on a bit because I didn't want it to sound like, what does that mean? It is really something I think to spend some time with. And there are a couple of other readings in here that I'll look up that are connected to that actually are commentaries on those verses. So I'll send around, Denise, to your question about what to read for next time, I'll send around information from the book that you can go to that's elsewhere in this book that you can also read in advance of the next class. But I think that's about it for today because we're at the end of this class. And
ask a quick question, sorry, before you sign off.
Sure.
I'm sorry, I momentarily lost the plot. Those two last lovely readings that you did, were those from the mind training book? And could you just tell us, please, the chapter or section? Thank you very much.
Sure. Yeah, that's from this book, this big book on mind training. And the first one, the teaching on taking afflictions onto the path, that's on page 197. So, Steve jumped in and let us know that's the case. And then the second one I read called Leveling Out Conceptions is right before that on page 195 and 196. Since we're talking about it, I will say that the other one that I mentioned is a commentary on that set of verses that I just read. A commentary on leveling out all conception is on page 293, and it's not too long. It's about 5 pages long.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, very much worth reading. And also, some books like this, it's not worth reading the footnotes, but there are footnotes in those verses, and also in that reading I gave you, read the footnotes. They're very, very informative, very, very informative. So with that, I will say the end of teaching dedication, and then we'll say goodbye. So stay with me through this. By the goodness of the deed I have just done, may all sentient beings complete the collection of merit and wisdom, and thus gain the ultimate bodies that wisdom and merit make. May what we've learned here today be wholly dedicated to the future well-being and happiness of all sentient beings, where there is no longer any suffering existence and only happiness and endless joy. So that wraps it up for me today. Our next session is on the 28th, and I think I've already covered what we're going to talk about. And I will, Denise has been helpful in circulating some things. I'll try to actually take these readings that I just gave you, especially for those of you who don't have the book, and it is a bit, and I'll get them made up in some fashion so they can just be sent like as a short Word document.
John, I'll post them on I've been posting all your attachments on the meeting description.
Right.
So that way, even if it was from a newer class, all of them will have a total list of the attachments.
Great. All right. So I think that's it. Hopefully that last section on meditation can start to bring together how everything's connected to the wheel, and in terms of where we can go with it and what we can actively do with the knowledge of the wheel. That's the purpose for talking about all the meditation stuff. So that's it.
Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
John.
John.
Enjoy the rest of your Sunday. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.